through the meeting. So it's lovely to see so many of you. A lot of you Herefordshire Meadows members, and we're also welcoming a few people from further afield this evening, and which is great. So I'm just going to say a little bit about Herefordshire Meadows as a group. We are a group partly funded by Natural England's Facilitation Fund. So we're a group of farmers and smallholders and land managers managing flower-rich grassland in a huge range of areas, really, in terms of some people have got very small paddock in their garden, other people are managing hundreds of acres of flower-rich grassland across a whole estate, for example. And we have a whole range of events and training and discussion meetings throughout the year, where we work with members of the group and with other meadow owners across the county. And this evening we are particularly focusing on the needs of smallholders in terms of machinery to manage flower-rich meadows, which is why you're all here. So we're delighted to have Tim Daniels with us as the speaker this evening. Tim, as you're going to see, is very passionate about the flower-rich meadows that he has, which is placed on the edge of the Black Mountains in Herefordshire. And it's absolutely phenomenal the work that he does there and the way he supports people in his local area, local community as well. And all of this is in addition to his day job. So that makes it all the more amazing. And he's got a series of lovely slides to show us this evening. What we're going to ask you to do is, because there are quite a few of us, you're all going to be on mute at the moment. We're going to ask you to, if you've got any questions, to put them in the chat function at the bottom of the screen. So I hope you're all familiar with that. If you're not, I'll just maybe, Rory, do you want to describe how the chat button works? You'll do that much better than me.
So just at the bottom, if you put your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, there should be a menu bar pops up, and in the middle of that there is a icon which says chat, and if you just click on that, then you'll be able to type messages in and send them, and we'll pick them up as we go along through the talk. Yeah,
great, thank you. So typing, and the thing I didn't realize to start with is you press enter at the end and then it pings up, and as you say, then Catherine and Rory will be able to put those questions later on. So that's what we'll do with the chat. We're going to we're recording this session so that people who couldn't be with us this evening will be able to hear it. And I think hopefully that's all I need to say. So great to see so many of you, and I'm going to hand over now to Tim to start his talk. So welcome, Tim. Thank you so much for coming along, preparing this talk for us. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk at this event. We were going to have some sort of open day here at some point, and then COVID came along and we abandoned that idea. And this webinar is certainly the next best thing, and at least there are some nice photos from different times of the year that I've taken in the presentation, so you can see some of the beautiful meadows that we have here. So I'm going to focus my talk this evening on my experience with machinery. I have to say, I'm not a farmer. I am what we call a smallholder, and the machinery I have is particularly well suited to my needs, but I'm certainly not an equipment expert. So I will defer to Caroline, Catherine and Rory and Sue for any more further technical questions on some of the equipment, but let's get started anyway. So yeah, so my name is Tim Daniels, and I'm located just on the outskirts of the Black Mountains, so just on the English side of the Black Mountains in Herefordshire. And we moved to this location from Bedfordshire when my work allowed. We wanted to be somewhere a little bit more rural. It was 2016 when we moved here, and we had pretty much no knowledge of wildflowers or even any sort of inkling that we were moving to a house with wildflower meadows. About 4.5 acres is wildflower meadows. And didn't quite appreciate the importance of these meadows until I got talking to some local people. So within hours of moving in, I met Peter Turney, who turned up quite literally on the doorstep that day, and he was eager to harvest some green hay from our meadows. So green hay being the meadows are being cut while they still are holding some seed, and very carefully being turned and then turned into green hay. So baling it while it is still damp, then taking it to a donor site that is prepared and scattering it, spreading that so that the seed can fall down onto the meadow. So Peter was doing some restoration projects, and Peter turned up and was keen to take some hay. And over the weeks that it came after that, we realized that we really needed to change our plans for putting animals and digging up parts of the meadows for vegetables and that sort of thing. So so the meadows were really, really beautiful. You can see here some of the photos, the one with the Bernadette moth down the bottom here, the day flying moths. And at the moment, this time of year, we've just got the green-winged orchids appearing in another field, and you can see those on the top right here. We realized that, you know, our plans were going to have to change. So the way we've been managing the meadows, with particular focus on equipment, so we have been cutting the bracken. We're in the higher tier stewardship scheme. We joined that a couple of years after arriving here. The main reason we did that was there were some really good incentives because the meadows weren't fenced. We could get a payment towards the fencing, but also there's a small payment each year towards haymaking and bracken control. So we cut the bracken that creeps in around the edges of the meadows. Have to cut it twice, so about 6 to 8 weeks apart. So as the bracken is starting to grow, it's putting a lot of energy into that. So if you can cut it at that point, and then when it starts to weaken, so in the following years you don't see quite so much bracken appearing. And the photos that I've taken here, the one at the bottom, shows you that using a strimmer with a blade, it's actually, you can go around. You can see some of the orchids in amongst the bracken here. They were completely covered over when I started, so you can see where you're going, and we cut it and rake it up. Obviously for large areas that would be a lot more difficult, and I know there are some people that will just mow and collect where the bracken is, but we find the strimmer with the bramble blade works particularly well. It's a blade that's curved on the ends, and you find that cuts a lot better than a straight blade. It allows you to mulch. You can move it downwards and it breaks it into little pieces as you go. So the next job that we have, that is probably my least favorite of the year. Now this doesn't involve machinery, but I thought I would include it to show you how we manage our meadows, is the hogweed job. Now the hogweed with late haymaking, quite a few people talk about the problems with hogweed going into seed as well, and leaving their seeds on the meadow. And we noticed that there were quite a few areas where, quite a few meadows where the hogweed was really taking hold. So we've been hand pulling the hogweed from our meadows. We start probably in the middle of May, towards the end of May, just as they're coming up to about the size you see in the photo here. And by the time we get to July, it doesn't have a chance to seed before we cut. So I leave the last few bits that pop up later on in the year. We are seeing less and less coming back, but I have to say we spent 17 hours one year. I remember we recorded all of our hours pulling hogweed out of the meadows. So it's kind of a family chore. We have a few of us going out pulling this, walking across the field every now and again. But do be careful if you do that, because the hogweed sap does take the protection from your skin, and ultraviolet will then damage it. You can get nasty burns. When I was younger, I had a particular incident with some hogweed, so I will always remember it, but you can get some really nasty blisters and burns. So we always wear gloves, long sleeve, and long sleeve trousers. We don't wear shorts or anything like that. If it's warm, then we'll work early in the morning or late into the evening to do that, rather than during the day. I know there are some people, I have talked to Caroline about this, that use chemical weed control. I think it's been talked about before, where you put some chemicals onto a glove and then you can wipe the hogweed, which will remove it. But I don't have any experience with that, and it's not really something I want to introduce here. But it can be done, spot treatment can be done if it's carried out correctly. So getting on to the equipment, there are, from what I can see, there are probably 3 different routes to go down. There's pedestrian equipment, which, as the name implies, you have to walk behind it. And Peter Turney in Longtown uses pedestrian equipment for his haymaking and green hay harvesting. There are some really good advantages of using pedestrian equipment, as I will go through in a moment. But before I do, I'll mention the second route I saw was taking sort of compact tractor or small Massey Ferguson type of size tractor with more standard but compact equipment on the back. Or you can be a commercial route where you have a farm possibly, and you use the normal standard type of balers and equipment that you would see in the fields around you. So really for meadow owners, I think really the bottom 2 categories, the pedestrian equipment and the equipment that I chose, the compact tractor, is probably the most suitable option. And as I said, the pedestrian equipment allows you to work in small spaces. As you can see, it's quite versatile. You can turn corners very tightly. You can go around trees if you have an orchard. You can work on fairly steep banks. There's no fear of you tipping a tractor over, for example, which is always my big fear when I'm on my tractor. My ground is very flat, but some of the meadows where I've made hay have been quite steep, and you can drive up and down fairly well, but when you get to the bottom and you've got to turn, it can be a little bit worrying. But pedestrian equipment is quite specialist. There are a few companies out there I've seen that make pedestrian equipment, but it can be quite expensive. So because of the size of our meadows, they're roughly an acre in size. They're fairly flat. I decided that it was best to go down the compact tractor route. So with that, I was able to purchase a disc mower for cutting, a gyro for turning and rowing up, and a mini baler to go on the back of the tractor. So the cutting, and I will just turn my volume down a second because the noise comes out on this video clip for me. Step 1, of course, is to cut the meadow. So you can see here I'm doing that. Our disc mower has 2 rotating discs. There are blades around the edge of that, and as you can see, it's fairly quick as you go along, but the width of the cut is really determined by the size of the equipment, and mine is, I think, 1.2 meters. So it takes quite a while to go around the field to cut. The downside is that the blades will blunt easily if you hit soil, so molehills can certainly shorten the life of the blades. They'll round off and blunt quite easily. Also, some of the meadows that I've been cutting locally, if the grass is, or the sward is very, very long, sometimes this can be quite hard work for small equipment like this. So I think that's been a challenge for me sometimes, especially when people want things cut later on in the season to allow seeds to fall. It takes me about 2 hours to cut an acre by the time I go up and down, round and round, and over the bits I've missed. So it can be fairly, intensive. And as I'll say a little bit later on, if you have a local farmer who's willing to cut your meadows and he can access it, then you really want to be trying to stay friendly with him, I would say. So I gathered some costs. So the company that I bought my equipment from is called Danelander. They specialize in equipment for smallholders. And at the time I found their prices were quite reasonable. This was a few years ago now, and my equipment was slightly cheaper than this. The prices do seem to have increased quite a bit recently. But I'm using some illustrations of price from their website. But I would want to say that I'm not associated with them in any way. It's just where I bought my 3 pieces of equipment from. So in this example, I needed a mower and a PTO shaft, which drives the mower. And then on top of that, it's wise to have a spare pair of blades in case you damage a blade while you're cutting, and you'll need grease and gear oil to go into the mower as well. But this slide gives you an idea of some of the prices depending on the width that you choose. So, starting at £4,400 for a 5-foot mower, and then you have to add VAT on top of that as well. So it's quite an outlay. So the next step is the spreading and tedding. So spreading is where we're scattering the sward everywhere once we've cut it, and tedding is where we go along and turn it over. So there are different settings. You'll notice in the center of my gyro, you'll see there's a lever, and I have to lift that up and turn it into the correct position, and that changes the position where the tines go up and down, which changes the action as you're driving it along. So this spins around, and it's sorry, I mentioned it's called a gyro. The other type of equipment that you will see commonly used by farmers is a hay bob, which has some smaller rotating discs. This does have the advantage that it's a little bit more like manual raking, like they used to in the old days with the tines. So you can adjust the speed of this quite significantly to the point where it's only turning very, very slowly. So if you wanted to turn a row of if you were making green hay and you wanted to turn a row, you could do it very, very gradually and very, very gently, which helps so you're not knocking the seed out. If you're running this very, very quickly and knocking the sward around, then you will have the seed coming out a lot more easily than if you're going slowly. So depending on what you're wanting to do, if you're wanting to just make hay, then you can go along quite quickly. But if you wanted to gather, if you wanted to make green hay, then you would do things a lot more gently and a lot more slowly. So the settings, as I mentioned, they can be set to tedding, which is turning, but also another setting is rowing up. So so when we get to the rowing up phase, we have to put what we call a windrow guard in place, and that's in the photo on the bottom right, you'll see the yellow windrow guard. That's adjustable, so you can adjust the size of the row. And of course, it's important that the rows are compatible with the baler. So if you are doing this for somebody else to come in and bale, be sure to ask them beforehand how big they want the rows, because you'll see I don't have a lot of grass. This is quite late in the year. You'll perhaps noticed how short it is, because a lot of the grass growth is suppressed, and we have very short sward. But in some places, as I say, where I've been, we have grass that's up to your thighs, and you think, oh goodness, how am I going to get this through the baler? The mouth of my baler is very narrow, so I need rows that are quite small to be able to fit into the baler. So if you're doing this for somebody that's got a commercial baler, it may be you could put much bigger rows together and fewer rows, which makes it quicker for them when they come in to do their job. Okay. So again, I looked at some costs for the gyro. Again, the top right is from Danelander, and the gyro rakes, spreads, rows up, waffles, which I've never heard of that word before, to be honest with you. So it makes waffles, and it does a number of other things. It has all of these different settings, but there are other alternatives, and I had a quick search on Auto Trader Farm and found a couple when I was putting my presentation together. And as you'll see, they look in reasonable condition, those two hay bobs, and I think you could probably get a reasonable second-hand hay bob, because they are in use by a lot of farmers. So the advantages of this phase of the haymaking is that you could potentially be doing this on your own. If you have an old tractor, it doesn't take much to drive a hay bob. It's not like a baler that needs a lot of horsepower behind it to be able to drive it. So it takes quite a long time for a contractor or a farmer to come back and forth to your property to keep turning multiple times while you're drying out the hay. So this is one area that I think people could potentially make a cost saving if they wanted to. If they have an old tractor, or perhaps between a few people have a tractor, you could have one person going around doing this. So step 4, so of course the fancy bit is the baling, and the baler is probably one of the most expensive items, and also one of the most difficult to run. So the tractor needs to be the right size for the baler, as I discovered when I was shopping for my own baler. And what happens here, if I go there, you should see it in action. So this, you can see that there is a hemp twine, which I use. It's an environmentally friendly twine, and it wraps around the bale, which is coming out the back now. And there you have it on the floor behind the tractor. So baling does take quite a long time. Each bale is about 25 kilograms, and we get about 80 or 90 bales from our small holding. So it's quite a while driving up and down the field to bale, but also to collect them afterwards. So changing the twine, that takes a little while. Occasionally, if you take the side off these things, you'll be a little bit scared when you look at it at first, until you get the hang of where it goes, and it goes around various little wheels and loops and so on. And balers also have a habit of breaking. This one has broken down a few times on me, and it hasn't been impossible for me to fix, because I've taken it apart, had a look at it, and figured out where things go and which parts I need. And Daneland have been pretty good at sending me parts as well in a hurry. But I could imagine if somebody is operating a baler in a group, and then you're due to have the baler the next day, and somebody tells you it's broken the day before, it could be quite frustrating. And if you're relying on people to fix the baler for you, I can imagine it being quite expensive. There are some fairly expensive parts, much like any mechanical, any machinery. Long and tough grasses will certainly jam my baler. I've found that, so I try to avoid the very long grasses when I'm cutting and baling now. And of course, as I mentioned, they're expensive to buy. And here we see some of the costs. So it's the size of the bale is what I wanted to highlight here. So the baler that I chose that you saw operating there is called the mini eco round hay baler. But as you go up in size, you might be able to bale faster. But I found that the size of those bales is so heavy, I couldn't really manage to lift those by hand, and I didn't want to be going around the field picking up each bale with my tractor. So again, I've added some prices there to give you an idea on the costs of again, at Danelander, where I bought my equipment. And I would say, you know, choose wisely according to the size of meadow, but keep in mind that weight of bale. And then, of course, the final job is collecting the hay. We have to collect it, and that can be quite a workout, especially if it's late at night and you're expecting rain the next day. I can fit 18 bales on my trailer, so of course I suppose really another piece of equipment that you need would be a trailer if you're planning on collecting and moving hay for any distance. And of course it's got to be dry. Hay can catch fire in a barn. So, you know, do be careful. If you have any that are slightly damp and heating up, then I will leave them just out on the edge and check them and make sure they've cooled down before stacking and storing them. In terms of, you know, resale value, we've been selling our hay at £3 a bale, and some years I've still had some. This last year, I've had people coming from all over the place to collect it because they couldn't get enough of it. It really does depend on the year, but keep in mind you have to store it if you're selling it. So considering the equipment, I think before purchasing equipment, I would definitely say consider the size of your meadows, the access you have to the meadow. Can you get commercial equipment in there? Can you even get a compact tractor in there? Or, you know, is it a very small space where you could only use a pedestrian mower? And what else is in the meadow as well? I often find orchards the most difficult to cut because the tractor, you can't get too close to the trees, so you end up leaving quite a patch around the trees, and then you can't make nice, neat and tidy rows, so you end up zigzagging all over the place. And orchards and trees are very, very nice, but from the person that's making the meadow, making the hay, it can be a struggle. Ponds, streams and ditches. I've been caught out a couple of times where I haven't seen the ditch till the last minute. So, you know, it's a good idea if you are making hay perhaps for somebody else to go and walk around quite carefully around the edges and through the field, and looking for anything that might get in the way. So hazards, I've hit tree stumps. I've had a mole trap suck up into my baler, which caused quite a bit of damage. Rocks, all sorts of things, you know, you can find in meadows that you won't see when the grass is growing and the wildflowers are there. And then the slope of the land for safe working as well. So I have a compact tractor, it's quite narrow, and I find that it looks like it would be okay on a slope until you actually get onto a slope and you start feeling one of the back wheels lifting up slightly, especially when you've got heavy equipment on there. So it can be quite worrying if you're not experienced with driving the tractor. It certainly worried me when I started to learn. And then of course storage of equipment. there's storing the hay, but there's also storing the equipment, and security of that as well. Is it going to be safe? Is another question to ask yourselves. And then, of course, the big question that I think a lot of people will put first is the cost. And as you've seen, it hasn't been the cheapest of exercises doing something like this. So another option, of course, is sharing equipment. And I know of some people that are sharing equipment successfully. And I also know that there can be some issues, but sometimes it can work very, very well with people to share equipment. But I think you should really think of things in advance. As I mentioned earlier, you could be waiting for equipment to come from your neighbour, say, and then it breaks down. You could find that your neighbour is getting more use of the equipment. Perhaps they have a larger field or longer sward to cut, taking longer, putting more hours on the equipment. And of course, equipment is always needed during the good weather. We can't say, oh, you can have it in November this year, because that's not really any good. So there's a very limited window of opportunity for us to cut our meadows. And I think that during good weather, it will be in demand. So you have to work out a fair division of that equipment during those times. But, you know, maintenance bills, obviously, there's going to be the ongoing maintenance. But if something happens to the equipment, I mentioned the mold trap that went into my baler. I think it was close to £300 for me to repair it by the time I bought the parts. The chain broke on the baler. There were some bearings that had gone. I had to order those by mail. I had to get them delivered the next day to make sure I could get it repaired to get the hay in while the meadow was while the weather was dry. I had to drive into Hereford and collect some parts. So it took quite a lot of effort as well to repair it. And then, of course, annual maintenance. I mentioned maintenance bills, but you know, there should be annual maintenance on these things, even if it's just greasing the joints and adding some oil to various moving parts and checking it over for wear and tear. And as I've already mentioned previously, storage has to be considered. Who's going to store it? And will it be insured? Of course, from the security aspect, if somebody does come along and steal a piece of equipment, you have to consider insurance. Plus insurance if you're taking your tractor to work on somebody else's meadows as well. If something, God forbid, went wrong, what would happen? You should really have some insurance. So another option I see is using a farmer or a contractor to do this work for you. Although it may seem expensive, I know the people that I have been making hay for, I say to them, look, it's quite expensive to run the equipment. I charge about £35 an hour from when I leave home to when I get back from home. That's my rate. The reason I charge that much, it may seem like quite a lot, but you've seen the costs of the equipment here, and the equipment only has a certain life and it takes a certain amount of maintenance and care. But if you have a farmer that's willing to come in and do this work for you, you know, even 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds an hour, I would consider being completely reasonable, because a farmer will be able to do the work far, far quicker. And if he can come in and bale the meadow for you, I would say, you know, snap his arm off for it. You know, it's really worth doing. Buy him a drink at Christmas at least, anyway. But of course, there are some concerns. You have to have large equipment coming into your land. So access is often a problem. You may get damaged trees if you've got an orchard and low branches, that sort of thing. They can compact the ground, these very large tractors as well. The The mowers, of course, are much bigger. The balers are faster. So overall, as I say, even if you're paying a rate for a large tractor to come in and do the work, it should be much more cost effective. So I would say hang on to anybody that offers to make your hay meadow with commercial equipment if you can get it in. And then, so here are a few of my final thoughts. I think I've covered some of these things already, but you can see some of the example costs. It's not particularly cheap owning your own equipment. It might be more possible for a for a small group of people to own it. Probably even better is to be able to find somebody that can bale and possibly cut, but then do the turning yourself, because that could use minimal equipment. With the hay bob, it's a lot more cost effective, and also it takes time, so you've got to go around the field so many times to turn it 3 or possibly 4 times with the rowing up. So you can save quite a chunk of time, and farmers or contractors, they're much more willing to come in, I think, if you can say there's a group of you doing having a meadow and it will all be ready on a certain day. So it's much easier to book somebody to come and do 2 or 3 places than perhaps 1. So if you can get together with others nearby and use somebody to do that work, I would suggest that that's certainly something that can cut the costs of this equipment considerably. The way I went is probably not the way I would go now, given my time again. But buying the equipment is costly. I looked at it as, well, I'm hoping to stay here for at least 20 years or longer. If you have enough time, you can offset that by going and potentially helping other small meadow owners out and doing their meadows for them, which is what I'm doing with a couple of people locally here. So that was my route. So that was my final thoughts on the actual haymaking and equipment. Just wanted to complete the picture a little bit with a lovely picture of our sheep there beneath the oak tree. So Natural England says, hay meadow management by cutting alone can very quickly result in a less species-rich community. Aftermath grazing is essential, partly to control competitive coarse grasses and partly via trampling, which creates gaps in the sward for germinating seedlings to exploit. So part of our stewardship arrangement is that we graze the aftermath. So this is anything that grows after we've cut it, and I have to say there's not a great deal grows on our meadows afterwards, but it still needs grazing off. And we use our flock of Kerry Hill sheep. They are probably more work than the cost of all the equipment and everything else put together. The amount of hours I spend doing sheep-related jobs is quite considerable, as anybody that keeps sheep, I'm sure, can appreciate.
But you love it, don't you, Tim?
So we move them around the meadows using electric fences in places. So our drive runs just behind them. I think you can just about see one of the little white sticks of the electric fence behind them there. It's quite labour intensive. So I take them to graze other people's meadows, but maybe at times we have to move them after a week, sometimes 2 weeks, but it doesn't take long for them to graze the area down. And moving all of those electric fences takes time, and trips back and forth, and trips with the sheep trailer, trips trying to catch them, because I don't have a sheepdog, so I have been known to swear at sheep quite a few times. But if you can find a local farmer or somebody with a flying flock like mine, I think that's ideal. I would definitely say don't get sheep unless you really have a passion to get sheep. They can be quite a lot of work. It's all the other things that you need to go with them as well, so we have to have the hurdles, the electric fences, the barn for the lambing, and so on and so on. But we enjoy it. We enjoy it. It's part of being a smallholder, I think. But it's certainly.
Is that your whole flock, Tim? We've got a question here from somebody about how many sheep you've got. So
Okay. So we have 9 breeding ewes and a ram, and you can see in the photo the ewes. We do have at this time of year quite a few more because they've all had lambs, and we keep some of the, because they're all pedigree, we will keep the ram lambs going, any of them that are that look good enough to be pedigree, and we will keep those going for a year, and they will keep the ram company. So at the moment I share these sheep with a friend, so he takes them at this time of year because all of the meadows are growing. We can't put the sheep on the meadows at this time of year, and we just have a few sheep locally, so the rams and the ram lambs are local, so I have 4 grazing a field locally.
great.
So yes, and I'll just give a quick plug that if you are local, if you're near Longtown, then I would be interested in if you have any meadows for grazing. I'm always looking for something, you know, sort of an acre or upwards at various times of the year. So we're always chasing grass for the sheep. So, and there we go. We come to the questions. So I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. It's the first time I've done this, and I think it's been quite an adventure and quite interesting for me as well. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Fantastic. What to say? Letting all that, you've done as a fantastic presentation, some really lovely photographs, and to hear your experience and all the knowledge that you've gained from that, and to summarize so clearly what you think of some of the opportunities, some of the positive, you know, the benefits and the challenges of being a machinery owner or a sheep owner, but to lay it out so beautifully in terms of the order of the year, that, you know, the whole annual cycle of a hay meadow and the process that we go through is fantastic. So big thank you. Lots of people are saying thank you here now as well. So we should be clapping now, but we're not because it's Zoom. So are there some questions? If people want to start typing in, I think we've got a couple already. Maybe Catherine and Rory could begin to put some of those questions forward.
That was such a great talk. Thanks a lot. There's a question from Flo Stoney. Going back to your hogweed, she's asking whether you're pulling by hand or you use a tool.
Okay, so yes, a lot of the time I pull it by hand. We do have a, how's best to describe it? It's a little, it's like a pair of secateurs on a long stick. So you squeeze the end and the secateurs on the other end. I don't know what you call that, but I could certainly look it up afterwards if that helps. So it saves you bending down, so you can hold the top of it and snip it at the base. But to be honest with you, a lot of the time I will pull it by hand because it's still quite small, and it's not very strong. So with gloves on, I can usually pull it by hand.
I don't know if Tom Oliver, I don't know whether you want to unmute Tom Oliver. He could talk about his bluebells and bracken experience.
Okay.
Well, just very briefly, I was very impressed with what Tim was doing with his brush cutter, but in our case, the bluebells and the bracken are completely inextricably together, along with other nice things that have been suppressed by the bracken. And the only way of stopping the bracken has been to switch each individual stem with a hazel switch, which gives you just the accuracy to cut the top off without knocking the bluebells off at the same time, which are literally, you know, inches away from each other. And it's half an acre on a steep slope, so, you know, one has to want to do it. But it is very, you know, it's very satisfactory. You know, after 18 visits last summer, there was no bracken, and all the bluebells were seedings. But I thought it's just worth observing that I thought the talk was so good because it explained how completely various and complicated careful meadow management has to be, and what a worthwhile thing the group is, because everyone's got different problems, but a lot of them overlap. And I'm very grateful for the whole exchange of information, because it, you know, I mean, I've had all the problems that Tim has described. Our hogweed's gone berserk, you know, all the same.
Yes, it is a very, well, I think labour intensive at times, you know, certainly the hogweed and the bracken. Not so much the bracken for us, because it is only the edges of the fields as it's creeping into the meadows. But it is very, very invasive, you know, as you say, it will take quite a considerable amount of cutting before it seems to die back.
Did you mention docks? But I'm very sorry, I missed the very beginning of your presentation. I don't know if did you tackle the question of docks in meadows before you got onto bracken?
I didn't know. So we don't really have docks in our meadows, but Caroline, would any of your team have any advice on docks?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think docks can be, so when you're saying it's interesting because you talked about pulling hogweed. I'm not sure, we will come back to the dock thing, but are you actually pulling the roots out of the ground as well, or are you pulling the leaves off? Are you able to get hogweed roots out? Because that's the aim with docks, isn't it? It's to get the root out as well, I think.
Well, I just, in my case, I've gone round in the fields where it's remotely realistic. I've gone around with the spade, digging out each individual dock plant, and that, you know, that's a bloody, excuse my French, extremely time consuming. But it, you know, if you really dig them out with a couple of sharp blows and you get your technique right, you can do, you know, many hundreds in an afternoon, and that's worth it if you stop them seeding. I just wonder whether anybody had a rather more scientific or productive way of doing it.
Does anyone else in the group win? I know there's somebody. Do either Claire or Hugh want to unmute and tell us about the machinery, the tool that you're using at the moment? Or you there?
Hello. Okay.
Hello, Claire.
Yep. Yeah, there. You can have some video.
Hi.
Hi. Yes. Well, on Caroline's recommendation, we've got a lazy dog tool ordered over the web. The first two blades broke very quickly, and then they acknowledged they'd had a problem with it after replacing them. We've now got the Mark III from a different, you know, that the company have gone to somebody else and got blades now that don't break. And they're a kind of fork with a sort of levery scaffold thing. So you dig it in, and then you've got handles in the right place to bring out a whole sod that has the root, when you're lucky, the root embedded in it, and you take out the whole root. When you're not so lucky, then you go down, or I go down anyway, with a long pronged thing just to get out what's left, or saw it off. Apparently, if you're more than a hand's depth below the ground surface, most people think that they don't regrow from that. So anything lower than that you can leave. But even that is apparently controversial. We have a lot of docks, and we've done quite a lot of background reading on it.
Yes, good. Well, thank you, Claire. So that's great. So that's the lazy dog tool. There is a link to that on our website somewhere. We can certainly send that round in the follow-up to this discussion. And I think Lynn's just saying, I don't know, in Herefordshire, I've heard you calling yours a dock lifter. I've heard people call them a dock riser. A lot of farm barns and sheds have one in. Sometimes I think the handle and the lifting contraption can be larger than the lazy dog tools, actually, some of the older models, but that's what people used to use. I think it's all about the moisture content of the soil being right to give up the dock roots at a certain stage. It can be efficient. Certainly organic farmers use those in gangs, sometimes people doing that. So that's one option. But then the other thing we've got going, does Rory, do you want to describe what we've got a demonstration, haven't we, coming up for contractors and anybody with deep pockets, I suppose, but of a new piece of machinery. What's the other way of killing docks? Does someone else want to describe that? Rory, are you on mute? Yeah, great.
Yeah, sure. So we are exploring the options of using an electrical treatment. So it's relatively new technology. One of the reasons why it is quite expensive is just being able to get the required voltage on a kind of mobile unit, I think has been one of the main obstacles that sort of needed to be overcome, but cost of sort of batteries and stuff is coming down exponentially, and it's starting to become a realistic option. And the idea is that basically it's the plant, the weeds, the target plant that you're trying to remove becomes the conductor itself, and the electrical charge will run down the entire plant system, right down into the roots, because of the high water content essentially in plants. And it fries it, to put it in an unscientific way, and it's obviously completely chemical free. It's completely targeted, so we'll only do that specific plant that you touch with it's a probe like Zapper, and it's supposed to be as quick as if you were using traditional sort of spot spraying chemical treatment. So we are yet to see how effective it would be on larger, more mature plants. And as Caroline said, we have a demo with a national company coming down and having a go next week, and we'll see then. We plan to do recording of that, and we'll put that up on our website for people to see. And hopefully, as Caroline says, we'll be able to find a contractor who might be interested in purchasing the equipment and have it available within Herefordshire for people to use on a sort of contracted basis. So yeah, watch our website next week to find out more.
Good. Okay. So Lynn, Rory, thank you very much for that. Rory, do you have a way? Lynn's got the dock riser in the office next to her screen, but she hasn't got a microphone, so she can't start talking in order to be highlighted. Is there a way of highlighting somebody?
Caroline, I've just plugged in a
You
microphone.
plugged in, Lynn.
Yes.
Wait, so let's see your dock riser. Oh, right. No.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's very old.
Wow.
But
Okay.
Richard's been using it this afternoon to get some of the biggest docks out
Out of your meadow that you've just restored. Fantastic. Great.
out of the cherry orchard.
Yes,
the
fantastic.
the original one. Yeah.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Now, while we've got Tim here, we can share pictures of dock removing equipment. What other questions have we got for Tim? And Catherine or Rory, got anything to put forward? Sharing
Yes,
machinery, whatever.
There's a question from Kath Killick asking about a topper, using a topper instead of a disc mower. A question to Tim.
Okay, so the disc mower cuts the sward probably an inch or two off the ground. So it's like a disc that sits onto the ground with the blades around the outside. So it's cutting at a very low level, leaving everything else intact to just flop over onto the ground as you go. With a topper, I believe that's sort of spinning, well, you can get them with, I think, chains or blades, and it's spinning, and I think it's actually cutting it up, chopping it up more like a mower, a garden mower would. So I think really for haymaking, you want to be able to cut it down at the base and leave it on the ground, so that the length of the sward is still intact.
I think that's right, Tim. And so you're getting a different product, and it's easier, unless you've got a collector on a sort of flail type mechanism, then you've got no way of removing it very easily, have you? And with a hay making process, you do, and with a lovely flower rich meadow, you want to be removing the arisings rather than leaving it to mulch, obviously.
Yes, I mean, something else I should mention, So I know there are some people who have had cut and collect equipment locally. I haven't seen it operating, but it's a bit like a large garden mower that's cutting the sward in the meadow and collecting all of the cuttings. So if you don't want to make hay, that would be another route to go down. I think that there was quite a lot of cuttings generated from this, so there was a huge pile, and I know of one person who made that into a compost. It took some effort, but it would be possible to turn it into something usable afterwards. But you know, be prepared if you're going down that route to have somewhere to put this huge mound of cuttings that you would need to drop off from the collector in the corner of a field somewhere.
And also the thing to think about then is that the seeds are all mixed in with what you're composting down, and they're not being returned to replenish the seed bank in your sward. So it's not really it's not a substitute for haymaking in that way, is it? I think it can be, it's better than doing nothing in the short term. It could be a very good way of preparing a meadow to a species poor grassland to be enhanced in the future. So Catherine, do you want to mention, we're thinking with some sites of using it as a method, aren't we, as preparing meadows for this summer's restorations?
Yes.
That's, yeah, I think that's another disadvantage, Tim, a disadvantage, isn't it, of using a flail collector?
Yes, no, agreed. So when you're going along with a hay bob or with a gyro, as I do, you're knocking all of the seed out of what you've cut on the ground, so it's returning the seed to the meadow for sure. Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, we got any more questions?
Yeah, there's one more comment from Avril Peacock, commending your talk, Tim, and also saying that they haven't been aftermath grazing for the last 5 years. They have been cutting and taking off. This is going back to the comments you were talking about, the grazing, keeping the sward open, etc. Yes. And they've noticed that they've got more diversity each year in the last 5 years. So, you know, for some sites where animals really aren't a possibility, I think it still is highly possible to still make a meadow and get it rich. I suppose it's down to your timing and your cutting and collecting, etc.
Yes. So we follow what Natural England have set out in the stewardship scheme, which is why we're doing the aftermath grazing and we have the sheep. But you know, honestly speaking, it's a lot of cost and a lot of effort for a meadow to have sheep. So if you could get somebody else to do it, great. But if not, then yeah, I think whatever's working really.
Thanks.
Good. So we've got a comment here about cutting and collect being useful where there's a serious thatch problem if something's built up. So it can be very useful as a remedial measure as well in order to open the sward up again. So thanks to Tom for that.